10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 403. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 403 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This week, we are continuing our series on Lady Bird, and we're actually going to be talking about something kind of specific today. One of the things that I love doing is using a tune as a vehicle to understand a bigger concept. And, we've been talking a lot about like these more broad concepts like key center soloing and really using your ears and trying to simplify. But that doesn't always mean that it's not worth it to get specific. And this is an example of that, what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to be talking about the backdoor 2-5-1 progression in bar 3, 4, and 5 of Lady Bird. And we're going to be talking about some really specific ways that you can learn to deal with this progression. But the nice thing is we're using Lady Bird as a vehicle for this kind of work, but then we're going to see backdoor progressions in, hundreds of tunes that we play over. So it's an example of really specific work that's going to pay huge dividends in a ton of different places, okay? And what I'm going to show you today is, again, one of those things where it's more of like a thought process than you should go and do this, and this is the one true way to work on this. But it's more like a thought process of how to get started, and then you can unpack it as much as you want over the course of weeks and months and years, maybe even. So that's my goal here, is to present to you one way that I would kind of think about this. And hopefully it sparks something in your own brain that leads you to a bunch of ways that you could do it. Really sort of teaching you how to design your own practice routine. So let's dive in. So what we have in the first 5 bars of Lady Bird is we start in the key of concert C. We have 2 measures of C major 7. And then we go to F minor 7 to B flat 7. So what looks like a 2-5 in the key of concert E flat, but instead of going to the key of concert E flat, we go back to C. And that's the definition of a backdoor 2-5-1 progression. That's the sound of it. So it's a really awesome progression that we see all over jazz. And what I want to do today is talk about how I would start to examine this progression and ultimately start to build some vocabulary over it. So one of the first things that I like to do over something like this is we know that a lot of the relationships are changed from like a regular 2-5-1. And, I've studied a lot about like voice leading and stuff like that over a regular 2-5-1. But then all of a sudden, when the voice leading changes with something like a backdoor progression, we have to re-examine what this looks like. So one of the things that I try to do is I try to start with like a big idea, and then I'll narrow it down into some of the things that seem interesting to me. So here's the idea that we're going to use for this. That's just going to be to run an experiment. Now I got kind of a lot to go through, so let's get into it. So if we think about a B flat 7 moving into a C major 7, here's the idea I would start with that would lead me to a ton of more specific work. What if I tried to play diatonic eighth notes over that B flat 7 chord, starting on every single note of the scale and running down? And the experiment I'm running is, where does that land on the downbeat of the next measure back on the C major 7 chord? So let's run through that. And I think if what I just said was confusing, it'll become clear as we go through this exercise. So if I want to use every single note in the B flat 7 Mixolydian scale. And I'm going to run down in eighth notes and I'm going to keep everything diatonic, then some things are going to happen. So if we start on B flat, which is the first note of that scale, and we run down diatonically, what happens is on the and of 4, we end up back on a B flat. So now the decision to make is, where do I want to go on the downbeat to sort of fit with that C major 7 chord? Well, I think I want to go to B major. But you see, I had to make that decision. I had to think about that, right? I didn't have to think about what I was doing over B flat 7 because I already sort of set that in my mind first. So I'm just going to pick a note to start. I'm going to run down diatonically, but then I have to make a decision on where I want to go on the downbeat. So that sounds like this. Now, why did I choose B natural? Because to me, that was the note that made the most sense. I want to probably resolve on a chord tone, and the closest chord tone was that B natural. Okay, well, now what if we start on C over the B flat 7 chord and we run down diatonically? Well, the and of 4 is a C. So the thing that makes the most sense is probably to go to that B natural again. We could have stayed on the C, but I like that B natural better. Sorry. Ah, what a nice sound. Okay, let's keep going. So now I want to start on D. I'm probably going to go to C there at the end. You know what I also could do? I could go up to E. That would have been fine too. Okay, but I just chose the C. Sometimes you just have to choose. All right, what if I want to start on E flat now? Cool. I'm going to go back up to E on that one. All right, what if I start on F? That one's a really obvious one. It's just begging for that resolution on the third. All right, what if I want to start up on G? Oh, well, this one's really interesting because we actually land on G on the and of 4. I don't really want to repeat that note. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold that note from the and of 4 and I'm going to resolve a half a beat early, which we hear all the time in jazz. If we put swing to it, you'll hear it even better. Cool. We got one more left, the A flat. That one's really obvious as well. Okay. So you see, what I'm doing is I'm just starting by examining what happens if I start on every single note and I stay diatonic. So I'm setting up some like conditions for my initial experiment. And then I'm just evaluating what are some choices that I can make that make sense with the parameters of this experiment. And that's all written out on the PDF. So you'll have that so you can examine it yourself and start doing some other things with it, whatever you want. But let's change the parameters of the experiment. So in the second experiment, I'm going to still go descending, starting on every note in that B flat Mixolydian scale. But now I have to leave an eighth note rest somewhere in the bar. That's how I've changed the parameters of the experiment. So if you look at example number 1 of the second experiment on the PDF, you'll notice that I left the rest right on beat 2. And obviously, this is going to change what happens at the end of the bar because we're removing a note. So therefore, if I'm going descending diatonic, but I have one less note, it changes the decision on where I land, right? So here's the first. This one's from B flat, leaving a rest on beat 2. Ah, that's really nice, isn't it? Okay, now I'll go up to C. I'm going to leave that rest right on beat 2 again. Cool. All right, now in this one, I'm going to start on D, but this time I'm choosing to put the rest on beat 3 because remember, I can put the rest anywhere. The only requirement is I need to leave a rest somewhere. So let's see what this one sounds like. So I chose to go up to that E because I think that sounds really good. All right, let's go up to E flat. And on this one, again, I'm going to rest on beat 3. Okay, let's go up to F, and this time I'm going to put the rest right on beat 4. Cool. All right, I'm going to go up to G, and this time I'm going to put the rest back on beat 2. Okay, and then we have one more. We got to go up to A flat, and this time I'm going to put the rest on the end of 3. So you see, it completely changes the relationships of everything. And that is how we want to do this work. Because what it does is it makes us examine everything. And then we can start developing language around these like sort of experiments that we've run for ourselves. What we might realize is that there's certain notes that we don't really want to start on because we don't like where they land, or we may want to go outside of that diatonic model. But one of the ways that we can start to realize this stuff in an organic way, in a way that makes sense, is that we run these experiments and it's just like a Kickstarter for our vocabulary, our language over certain progressions, over certain cadences, stuff like that. So what I really want is for you to maybe look at the PDF, run through these experiments yourself so that you can hear them. But then ultimately, what I would like you to do is further the experiment in a way that makes sense to you, right? So use this as a launching pad for another idea that you could come up with that's sort of based off of this. Okay, well, if it's diatonic descending, what could I do to sort of mess with that or change that or make it into something that sounds cooler than what it is, right? I mean, it's a really basic idea. Some of it sounds really good, but there's so many things that we could do to this rhythmically and note-wise. And that's sort of where I want your mind to start going. Okay. So start with my experiments and then try to develop the next step on your own. That's really the goal here. So I mentioned that there would be a sheet with these experiments actually written out on them. And the way you can get a hold of that is by choosing to support the show on Patreon. We're a member-supported podcast. So if you would like to support us and make sure this show keeps coming out, you can find all the details on that, very low monthly fee, and you get a ton of stuff over at our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and just search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson podcast. And as soon as you sign up, you get instant access to all of that stuff. And the $5 members are going to get more trading tracks this week, and everybody else will get, these sheets. So if that's something that you might want to do and show your love for the podcast and get a bunch of stuff in return, you can go and get yourself signed up. Again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com. Search up the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson podcast. Thanks to our new members this week. Thank you to Charles, Andrew, George, Jeffrey, Stefan, and Josh. Thank you guys so much for choosing to support this show. It means the world to me, and it's the reason that I can keep doing this. We will see you next week, and we're going to investigate a different part of the form next week. I think you probably might know where it is. It's those last 2 bars, because there's some really interesting stuff going on, and we'll run an experiment similar to this week. Okay? All right. Hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a good one. Bye.